The following is a film produced on location in Hampton Falls, New Hampshire, and is a collection of the oral histories of some of the town's cherished, lifelong residents. Their wonderful memories of growing up and living in the small rural town of Hampton Falls gives us a living window into local history and a new appreciation of days gone by.
The population of Hampton Falls, when I was born in 1928, I seem to recall it being 491. And I knew, growing up here, I knew most of the residents of Hampton Falls. Hampton Falls had two large apple orchards, Elton Orchard and Applecrest. Most of the residents had their own farms. They maintained a cow or a horse, sometimes more, and sold milk and raised some agriculture.
In Hampton Falls, when I was growing up, a lot of people, they were getting by, but it was hard, money was hard to come by, and you went to work picking apples. You did anything you could as a child. You made a little money. You'd work at Applecrest or Elton. I remember Jimmy Owen paid me $7.49, and he says, "I'm not going to give you the half cent, so we're going to keep it at 49." I haven't forgotten that one, but anyway.
I grew up in Hampton Falls on the farm with my family. My oldest brother, Forrest. I had the animals and chasing cows in the pastures.
And all these areas were open and clean because varying animals kept them that way there. But we used to play up on the common they had the Ackerman house had an old barn, and it had some hoops from the wagon wheels. We'd get the hoops and roll them around on the common, and the real challenge was rolling them down the hill on 88 from the common down to my house to see if you could keep up with it and keep it upright.
Everybody was just friends, people, you know. Some people happened to have more money than others, but it didn't make any difference back then. Money wasn't, it wasn't a big thing then.
It goes back to the feeling of freedom that we had in growing up, that we could either bicycle or even walk or horseback ride to visit with any of our friends. I remember I would just put the horse out in there with their horses and would play for the afternoon. And then I'd saddle back up again and ride home.
Big event was going to the dump. When we used to go to the dump on Saturdays, everybody would use the town dump, and everybody would meet there and talk and find out what's going on and stuff.
Somebody was running for office. He'd up there and stand around the dump on Saturday morning.
Meet everybody.
And, in the course of the day, he'd meet most of the people and he'd do his campaign in there.
My father was a fourth-generation New Yorker, and I'm not sure he knew what an apple tree looked like. So that's where we started from. And with the help of certainly the Eatons and the Youngs and the other employees, they learned about growing apples. And that was 1954.
The town has the charm that has always been part of Hampton Falls. You don't want to lose that. And that's always been the good part. The neighbors are good, the people are good. If there's any issues, people step up, and there's no questions. Just do what you can to help people, and that's what the logistics should be.
When my mother turned 85, she was a delightful woman, and we wanted to give her a surprise party. We got permission to use the town hall. We invited everybody, and it was just spectacular.
And that's the way Hampton Falls has always been to me, is heartwarming.
Everybody in town knew everybody. I mean, you did something wrong, everybody knew it. But materialistic things were not as important because there wasn't that much. First, we didn't have TV. We'd sit around the radio and listen. I mean, from 7 to 9 o'clock at night, that was the big thing. Hampton Falls is a wonderful town. Good people.
If I remember correctly in the history, there were 4 different schools for different areas of the town, and the winter was a challenge getting to school.
Okay, I started school in the East School in Hampton Falls. It was situated where the present Lincoln Ackerman School is now, and it burned down in 1948 or 9. I forget which year it was. Going to school in the East School, that was tough. We had chemical toilets. They were smelly. They were awful. But we had to carry water. We had a pump out front. Pump the water. We had a little, like a jug with a spout. You had to carry the water and dump it in, that was our drinking water.
The teacher did the music, the art, and all sorts of things. Occasionally, the teacher would ask an older student to supervise another class, maybe to help them be quiet or read something to them. But the teachers had the big responsibility of conducting 3 classes.
The toilet area was tough. Oh my goodness, that was tough. It was scary because you would look down in and oh my goodness, there was this big tank. And it also had hornets. And I had a bad experience with a hornet.
It was a long day on the bus. They were awful buses. They were made out of small vans. You had to crawl. You had to tip the seat down and get in the back. They weren't really safe. But from the East School, I went to the junior high school in Hampton for 2 years, 7th and 8th grade. That's where I learned to play sports, because in Hampton Falls, we had nothing like that. Hampton was so far ahead of us and things like that.
Well, the Lincoln Ackerman School was named for a man of that name who lived right across the common, and he was killed in the war.
Okay, when they had built the new Lincoln Ackerman School, and we started there, other than being everything new and shiny and running water and toilets and drinking fountains, it wasn't all that different. We still had the same 3 classes per classroom. And we had a gym and a cafeteria.
I think I received a good education. We got quite a lot of individual attention, even though so. And the teachers came to the homes of the parents and the children frequently. I remember a teacher coming up for supper occasionally. And in fact, some of the teachers eventually fell in love and married somebody here in Hampton Falls.
I remember the teacher said, if you don't learn these words, you're going to sit down and write this word 100 times until you spell it correctly. And because I went through that today, it's totally different. Computers, I have more power to do it. But.
When I was in the 3rd grade, Mrs. Sweeney was our teacher, and we started every day with the 23rd Psalm. So to this day, I can recite the 23rd Psalm because of Mrs. Sweeney.
I was in the 7th grade, and at the time, once you got to the 7th grade, you had some choices to make. If you happen to live on this side of Hampton Falls, or on Route 88, you tended to go to Exeter. If you lived close to Route 1, you went to Hampton. We also had the option of going to Amesbury and going to Newburyport. But as I say, it was pretty much where you lived. And there was the Kents lived across the street, Gloria and Herbie, and of course, Gwendolyn, whose father was Walter B. Farmer, who started Applecrest. And Herbie was very prominent in the town of Exeter with the bank and the mill. And he would drive Gloria and my sister to school in the morning.
That's what Hampton Falls has always done, in my estimation, is gone forward in the way that it makes life better, it educates the children. Wonderful place to raise children, and the school has always been thought very, very highly of.
My grandfather, of course, did business with the store, Dodge, Charlie Dodge owned the store. And then he bought the store. And then it was George F. Merrill store. And then my father and my uncle, Roger Merrill, went in business with my grandfather. And it was George F. Merrill and Son. Then when they bought it, it was Merrill Brothers store. And then my father bought my uncle out, and it became R.P. Merrill. And then R.P. Merrill and Son, which was my older brother, he took my brother in business with him when my brother got back in the service. And it became R.P. Merrill and Son. And then when my father died, then it was Merrill's, just Merrill's store. And that's the history of the store.
Merrill's store was certainly the center of the universe as far as Hampton Falls goes.
It always was. And of course they were a hub of the whole town. There was Mr. Merrill, and then there was Punky and his sisters, and George, and everybody kind of revolved around there. And Hampton Falls has always been very rural. The Merrill store was it.
Well, the first thing we did was we ran over to Merrill's store and spent, let's see, 5 cents for a Coke and 10 cents for a Dixie cup, or 15 cents for the Sunday cup. That was the treat.
There was 2 buildings. There was a store and another building that used to set up above the store where they sold grain. They sold grain, nails, stuff like that, hardware. There was a hardware department in the back of the store because there were drawers and boxes and stuff, and I used to go out there and paw around through those when I was a kid. That was like a treasure trove. I used to go out there.
But anyway, I remember going to Merrill's store with a note and 25 cents to buy a pack of cigarettes. No problem. Give the kid a pack of cigarettes.
When we were in grade school, the older classes were allowed to walk down to Merrill's store, and we could buy candy or whatever. And we would also do that for any of the younger children that were not old enough to walk down to the store, and would come back with pockets full of candy for whoever wanted it.
Yeah. And I remember they had a sort of soda fountain, probably only 3 or 4 seats, big mirror up behind it with a big fancy wooden frame, and you could get an ice cream or a soda. And the post office was a window with probably 12 mailboxes on either side of it. But hey, everybody got rural delivery.
They sold shoes, they sold clothing, overalls, jackets, and stuff like that. Meat, canned goods, sugar, all your staples. And then on the left-hand side was the post office. And when I was a kid, my aunt was postmistress. And then my father became postmaster. And then when he retired, my brother became postmaster.
And then when I was 15, I started working at Merrill's store. And I worked there for 30 years, and I always joke that The only way they got rid of me was by selling the place, but then I fooled them because they turned it into the post office, and I started working for the post office, and I was there for another 20 years. So I spent 20 years, 50 years of my life working in the same building.
The lovely, lovely old town hall, back when I first came here, there was a move in Hampton Falls to tear it down and put a little box town office there. So there was a move afoot, and we stopped them, and it was made over into town offices. It's functional, but you've saved the past. The only thing that I regretted was when they took the stage out, because there are towns who have saved the stage, and they have plays and different things like that. But at least we saved the building. The way I understood it, it was used for everything, because they had dances there, they had a beautiful stage, had stage plays there. All kinds of functions went on there.
And we went through the front door, and I had this feeling something's wrong, something's not right. And I kept looking around, and then I said, the stage is gone. And that was it. It really bothered me that the stage was gone, because my father was a square dance caller, and he would be up on the stage and square dancing down on the floor. And we had all our school plays in the town hall. It would be up on the stage. Yeah. But the town hall was used for any sort of gathering other than town meeting. It was the central point.
You could use it for, like, if you have a special occasion coming, like an anniversary or a big birthday. But we had many celebrations there.
The town hall used to have a lot of activities at the town hall. They had usually square dances, a lot of square dances. Yeah. And they had, in town, they had a bunch of people that would put on plays. I was pretty talented. Yeah, they're pretty talented. They were good plays. They were fun. But I can remember my father hated the square dance. So guess what? I was the oldest. So when Mom wanted to come down and go square dancing, I had to go because I had to be. But there was always something going on at the town hall. The big thing was elections and,
Of course, the bathrooms were another thing. They were quite a challenge. But it's been updated and saved. And now it's another building that we can be proud of.
Well, we had two libraries that I used to go to. One was up at where Dean Glover's house, where Dean Glover used to live. The Knight sisters lived there, and that was a library that was closer to my home. And we'd go there just to get books to read or whatever. And then if you wanted to do reference library type work, you'd come to this library, and you come in the door, and it was a lot different than it is now. And it seemed like there was little, rooms. They were made like into areas, like the children were way in the back, like a little area. But this was the library.
It was, and I remember the side door wasn't there, and it was down in that corner that was the children's room, and there was a table, and that's where I would go to get all the Black Stallion books by Walter Farley.
People of the town have done is they have taken this building, which was the library, and leased it out to the Hampton Falls Historical Society. And it is a priceless building. Eddie's direct ancestor was one of the founders of it. And if people haven't seen it, it's magnificent. The ceiling is just beautiful. And a local woman laid on her back and redid it, and it was worth doing. And the Historical Society has come forward and made the museum out of it, and have the meetings here, and it's just fantastic. And that's the way Hampton Falls seems to always have gone forward. It's taken the past with them instead of carrying it down.
A difference between today and when I grew up was that it was all farm and dairy. There was, Burwell's had the dairy farm, Bill Marston had a dairy farm, Applecrest and Elton, so it was all apples in between. Charlie Green would plant corn, and potatoes all over town. So there would be that end of town, and down this end was Edgerly's, and Edgerly's had the stand where the shopping center is now. So there was a stand there. So the kids at this end of town worked at Edgerly's farm, picking and harvesting and working at the stand.
Applecrest Farm, as an apple orchard, started really as a chicken farm, and these beautiful stone walls that were chicken coops. So all the old photographs had chicken coops all around the roads, and these little small apple trees planted all around. And you could see that they're starting to develop the apple orchard and from the chicken. Applecrest had one of the first aspects of agritourism in an apple train that went from Boston, Waterby Farmer back in the 20s, all the way through possibly the 30s and even maybe the 40s. And he brought people from Boston up to the railroad tracks in the depot by the marsh. And they dropped them off there, and he picked them up in his wagon and brought them to the apple orchard to pick apples. Wormless apples. That was the special. That's what made Applecrest apples so special.
My father was working in Lawrence at the time, and my parents decided they would move closer to Lawrence. He said, "We have a lovely house. You have a big house to handle your family. Why don't you take a look at it? By the way, it does have some acreage and some apple trees on it." My father was a fourth-generation New Yorker, and I'm not sure he knew what an apple tree looked like. So that's where we started from. And so that's how my parents got here. They went to UNH, the horticultural school, to find out about growing apples. And with the help of certainly the Eatons and the Youngs and the other employees, they learned about growing apples. And that was 1954.
It was all, we worked on the farm. That's what they did. We picked corn and dug potatoes for Charlie Green, and the parks down the street had strawberries, and my brothers and sisters would go down there and pick them for 5 cents a quart so that Mrs. Parks could sell them. The Burwells had the farm next door, which was a dairy farm, so there was always cows around. We just grew up on a farm. But
Charlie Green gave a lot of kids jobs in town that, nickels and dimes and quarters, I don't know what it was, pick potatoes and stuff in the fields, and everybody worked for Charlie Green. And
we had people back in the 50s when my mom and dad first bought the farm in '54. We advertised pick your own drops, and that's how the whole pick your own started. We used Jamaicans who are legally allowed into the country with special papers. We put them in barracks. They're like family to us. They've been like family to us. We have the same people here that I can remember when they know me when I was a kid. I have a 72-year-old working who's worked here for close to 45 years. And I think they're also like family members to a lot of people in this community. I think everybody respects them. We respect each other. Obviously, without the Jamaicans, we'd be out of business. No question about it.
Working at Applecrest way back then was great. We had, a lot of neighborhood kids had a chance to work for a company or, for a farm, and they treated us good. We made a little bit of money, and the Wagners were really nice people.
I worked summers. It was a great place to work summers. It was outside physical work, which I was looking for. It was a nice change from the academic world.
And there were, obviously, coming back to the farm, down deep was something a lot of people, it's never out of your system. You think it is, but you never lose it.
This whole land will never, ever, in perpetuity, be able to be developed. It will have to remain exactly the way you see it for the rest of time, which is kind of nice, isn't it? And the town allowed that to happen. it's a small town, Hampton Falls, a small town in Hampshire, I should say, Hampton Falls, and we have been recognized as being one of the oldest, largest, continuously run apple orchards in the country. And that says an awful lot. I mean, to be able to continually run an apple orchard that many years, it's over 100. I mean, we're, as you can see, 100 years. So.
But Hampton Falls was a rural area. It was beautiful. And when I was young and came here, I remember Great Hill didn't have any trees on it. All of these trees that people think we shouldn't cut down years ago weren't there. The marsh was open, the hills were open, and it has grown up considerably since then.
When this country was settled, when the people came here from overseas, that was a beautiful thing, all that open grassland. They didn't have to cut any trees or clear anything, and there was hay there to feed their cattle, and it also gave the cattle salt, because they get the salt off the hay. And that was the most valuable land on the coast. And everybody that got a grant of land got a portion of the marsh. And if you ever saw a map of the marsh, of the property owners, there's a piece here and a piece there and a piece here and a piece there. And it's all cut up like a jigsaw puzzle. And these were pieces of land that were given to the people that were homesteading it. And they drove these locust posts into the ground. They called them stables. And they would build a haycock on top of the stables. They'd have probably, I'm going to say 8, 9 locust posts driven into the marsh. Now those were driven and done when this country was settled. And you can pull up one of those stables right now, and below the top of where it goes into the mud, it looks like it's brand new. And they've been preserved by the salt and the mud. Now I'm going by what my father told me when he was a kid. There used to be, people would go down there on the marsh with a horse-drawn mowing machine, or they'd mow by hand. And they'd mow the hay and cock it up on the stables, where it would be above the water. And it would season there. And in the fall, the end of the growing season, they had these long poles that they'd go down and they'd shove the poles through the stables, pick up 2 people, could carry a haycock off the marsh. And they'd carry them to where the horses' wagons were there and put the haycocks on the wagons and haul them back to their farms.
Over the years, you can see that what's happened to the salt marshes. Growing up, they were still popular by farmers for their hay, and they cut the hay. But through changes over the years, the marshes became wasteland, and nobody wanted them. In fact, they gave them to the town for taxes. My family owned a lot of marshland. We just gave it to the Fish and Game Society to maintain for the public use. For the future, I hope the next generation will be able to enjoy the wide open spaces and the salt marshes that Hampton Falls has.
There was a lot more woods and wide open spaces than there is now. Old Stage Road was dirt, Frying Pan Lane was dirt, Parsonage Road was dirt, Crank and Goodwin roads were dirt. The Depot Road was dirt. Rimmer Lane was dirt. All gone, all paved. What did they do?
In order to repave a road or retar a road, trucks would come along and dump sand piles along the edge of the road, spaced evenly along the side. And then the tar truck would come, drop the tar from his truck, and men would come with shovels and take the sand and throw it on the tar to hopefully harden it. And it would take several days for the tar and everything to dry before you could drive safely on it.
So all the kids would come home that had to walk, would come home from school with tar stuck all over their shoes, which made mothers very unhappy.
We were always careful to stay off the main roads as much as possible. And there were so many back roads, and so many of them was still dirt.
Well, yeah, the only main road was really 88, and that was like a really shabby road back then, until Wes Powell became governor, and then they paved it. They made it a beautiful road. And in those days, I wasn't allowed to go on 88. Route 88 was very busy when I was a young girl. The big box trucks would be flying by to go to Newmarket, shoe companies, and it was pretty risky. So when I eventually got a bicycle, I wasn't allowed to ride my bicycle on Route 88. I had to stay in the dooryard, or in back of the farm we had roads where the equipment would go to the fields in back, so I could ride my bike there. Yeah. Then we decided to have 95 go through. Oh, yeah. It was so cool. I can remember going out at night with my dad, the scientist, and there was no noise. No noise outside, except for maybe the crickets or whatever. And if you do that now, all you hear is traffic from 95 farms. And next to Ann's house, there was a farm. It was the Browns, the George Brown's farm. And he had a lot of cows, and he milked them and had a room in the barn that was all painted white for the milk. And he had these big coolers in there. And a milk truck would come in the morning early. You always heard the milk truck come to get the milk, and he'd leave. You know, and you forget about those noises too, because that was the milk truck would come. Mm-hmm. You know, and my father would take us outside, like when it was a cool autumn night, lay on the road because it was warm, and look at the constellations and tell us what they were, and explain it to us and everything. And that was his way of educating us, and it was great. I still remember that stuff.
Did a lot of walking. I can remember bicycles, and kids use bicycles. I can remember walking from my house to the Ioka Theater in Exeter with my mother to go see Bambi. Well, I wanted to go so badly, so she took me, and we walked for 6 or 7 miles to get to Exeter to go to the movies.
So my domain was from the Burwell farm down to would be Miss Knight's house, which was the library annex. So I could go down there and get books. And in the front room of that house, there was a great piano, and we used to go and play the piano.
Always had, I can remember on Saturday mornings, that was the time I went up to Chisholm or different places, the Creightons, and mowed their lawn. And I'd get 50 cents, or I think it was 50 cents, maybe $1. And so if you did 2 or 3 lawns, you might get $2 or $3 a week, and that was a lot of money for a kid back in those days. And I can remember I worked all summer long. When I was a kid, I'd always work during the summer to earn enough money so that I could buy my school clothes, because Mom and Dad couldn't afford to buy me too much in school clothes.
Regarding going to the beach when we were younger, we didn't get to the beach that much because, number one, it was a ways to go, so we didn't get to go there as often as we'd like. But the big thing was to go down to the depot when the tide was right, and we'd all go swimming at the depot. Fight off the greenheads, but we would go swimming at the depot. And there's one rock, and I'm sure it's still there, that if you dive in at high tide, it's not a good thing to do. So you always had to know where that rock was, because it's right there. So if you just have to know what the different logistics would be, but that's where we were. That's where we ended up spending our time. Between there and I, myself, would be down at Savage's in the pond, because we all got to learn to swim there.
I don't know as they really knew when I was a kid all that much about polio, but most people figured that when the water got warm, fresh water, you could probably get polio, either from the mosquitoes around it or whatever, and that's why we didn't swim the fresh water.
Out together, we used to go down into the woods, and there was a stream way down the back of her house, which is now Linden Road, that we used to drink water out of. And it's like, people don't believe me, but it was a nice stream that ran constantly, and it was crystal clear water, and it tasted good. It was, and both of us made it. You know?
Yes, as a child, I frequently went to swimming down at Hampton Beach. In those days, there were no parking meters at the beach. You could go down and spend the day and do what you wanted to. There were still some stores at the beach because that was a resort, but not as quite as civilized as it is today.
It was, the cows were out in the field. There was a pasture, not where the stream was, but we used to jump over the cow flaps. That was a game. And if anybody missed, they lost.
Yeah, we did a lot of stupid things. The old thing about putting some cow manure or stuff in a bag and putting it on somebody's doorstep and lighting the fire, and they'd come out and step on it to try to put it out. I mean, those are things that we did. And a lot of the social activity dwelled around the church. They had Bible school, they'd go on picnics. They used to take us, the minister, Everett Scruton, used to take us Kingston Pond, or sometimes to ball games and stuff.
Remember too, the Unitarian Church was, of course, just a summer church, but very, very active. My parents were very much involved.
When we were younger, we did not go on vacations because money was an issue, number one. But number two, it was the time of the year that the gardens were all coming in, and we had to work in the yard and work in the garden to get things ready for the fall and for the winter. So you had to take care of the food and preserve and can, and there wasn't a whole lot of freezing at that point. It was basically preserving. So my mother did a lot of that. So yeah, we didn't go on vacations.
The people today, I think, operate similar to what they were when I was growing up. Friendly and happy, and enjoy living in Hampton Falls, and hoping to maintain some sort of country living. I can recall many big snowstorms we had growing up. As kids, we certainly enjoyed playing in the snow. I do remember the biggest snowstorm that I can remember came in late November. I was still in high school. And it started out as a rainstorm and turned to snow. And the next morning, all the roads in Hampton Falls and around were completely blocked. The ordinary snowplows couldn't take care of it. So we got out the town tractor plow. I don't think it is still in existence. And we're able to finally clear some of the roads. Because the drifts were enormous, and it was several days before some roads were plowed. Today, the roads are plowed every hour, but in those days, the roads were not plowed until the snow stopped falling.
But the thing is, it did the job because a lot of times you get heavy winds and real snow drifts, and you couldn't get through. I mean, you just couldn't. There was a little cab. I think maybe two people could sit in the cab, if I remember right. I don't know.
Well, it wasn't really room for two people because you were working the levers.
But on the back, there was a platform that you stood on, almost like
a piece of canvas hanging down over you. And I've not ridden, but walked many, many miles behind that tractor because you're standing there in the back of the tractor and it might be 10 above with the wind blowing.
Pretty cold.
And you'd get pretty cold, so we'd walk behind the tractor. And the tractor only went like 4 or 5 miles an hour.
It wasn't very fast.
And you could walk behind it and keep warm. Dickie Perkins and I don't know how many miles we walked behind that tractor.
I remember when
I do remember one winter, they had to call the big V plows down from Concord to plow Route 88. We were so snowed in. The snow in our living room was not above the windows, but up to like the first pane, I mean, we were really in.
They weren't in such a hurry to plow the roads bare instantly as they are now. And you got used to driving around on snow-covered roads. You just simply slowed down.
Here, the winters here are great. I love the winters in Hampton Falls. I love snow. I mean, it's so good. And you might think I'm foolish, but I don't do it anymore. But up until a few years ago, I would walk outside barefoot in the snow. And I tell people to do that now. If you're young enough to do it because it is amazing. I mean, she had a pond in her yard, lucky girl. And in the wintertime, that was the skating area for all the kids in the neighborhood.
Everybody from all around would come and skate.
You know about the Pevear boys. And they used to skate out on the pond here in Hampton Falls and play hockey. Well, Eddie and Charlie, apparently, they were the youngest of 9, and they didn't have hockey sticks, so they used branches. And they used to call them the slashers.
When my father would build a bonfire late in the afternoon when it started getting cold, we would all gather around the bonfire.
Whittier's Pond was the place to be, and kids came from Hampton and Northampton. Whittier's was well used as a skating thing. Everybody got along, and we'd be down there from the time school got out, you got home and got your skates and got to Whittier's Pond until supper time. And then we'd be back again after supper. We'd have a bonfire out on the ice and skate till like 9 o'clock, and then 9 o'clock was curfew. Not just time to go home. It was curfew. If you were under 16, you had to be off the streets by 9 o'clock.
I can remember we used to, in town, I don't know whatever happened to it, but they had a huge long bobsled. Had two runners in front, 2 in the back, and it was at least from here to that wall.
That belonged to my father.
Could be.
And it was up in the barn.
Yeah, and they took it out and used it though once in a while.
Oh yeah, you had about 9 of us on that thing.
You get 15.
Would that thing go? And when they started salting the roads, that was the end of the fun for that.
That's right. But before
Whittier's, the hill on Whittier's, that was all open, and we used to slide in toboggan, and you'd go out onto the ice. And the whole idea was to see who could go furthest, of course.
But the big excitement of the winter was across the street. George Thatcher, Carolyn's father, made this wonderful toboggan jump. I don't know why we weren't killed, but my goodness, we would fly, and he would wet it. So the jump would be icy. We would fly down that hill, and it was great.
We had a lot more snow back then than the 60s. I had a horse that drove and a sleigh, and we'd hitch her up after a snowstorm and go out and drive around town in the sleigh, and the old people loved it. And that was one of the things I did when I worked at Merrill's store, was people would call in their grocery orders, and we would deliver. I'd hitch my mare up and take the groceries and go deliver the groceries by sleigh. And honestly, the faces on the old people were just priceless. It was, memories out of the past.
Russian times, let me refresh your memory, was basically all the 30s until World War II started. So gasoline was roughly 15 cents a gallon in 1942. The price of a home in 1942 was roughly $3,800. During the war, it was tough. The Germans, people were very afraid of the German Nazi take over the world. That's what they were trying to do. Well, how it affected Hampton Falls, we had to go through blackouts, even in this town. We had air raid drills. They told us in Exeter when we were having an air raid drill, we had to participate in that. You had to turn your lights out. You had to dim your headlights. You had to put black tape across one half of your front headlights.
I remember my mother talking to neighbors about the time that the planes went over to go overseas, and it just went on and on. And I think she said for hours, all of these planes just droning over.
We heard this noise, and we all ran to the windows, and you'd see tanks, long lines of tanks, go by the common down there, down Route 1. They were just right on Route 1. It was a common thing to see fighter aircraft go over, P-51s, B-17s, flying over high in the sky and stuff. It was.
And we had air raid spotters. It was pretty scary because the Germans were looking off our coast. They were sinking our ships, so you really were well aware of the danger, the fear of the Nazi taking over this country. And the Navy Yard, the Portsmouth Navy Yard, was looking for help. Well, that boosted the income of everybody in town. It helped the whole economy. The home economy just took off. They built 15 subs in 1942, so think about it, 24/7. They were pumping subs out once, over one a month. So a lot of people who were on little tiny farms in Hampton Falls went to work in the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. So that
many of the women used to be bused to Navy Yard, and a lot of the women did the work that the men were doing before the war, building the submarines and stuff at Portsmouth.
World War II didn't affect Hampton Falls too much, except the people who were called to go into service. And quite a few did go. And I know my sister was engaged to one of the men that was lost his life in the accident in training, and that was hard on the family.
So everybody was conscious of the war, and people contributed to the war. They wanted you to grow gardens, so they had what they called victory gardens. They had urged everybody to have a victory garden, which that helped because food was scarce. Everything was going to the military. Everything was going overseas to help Britain, Russia, France. So
when I was in school,
we gathered those.
We used to gather those and put them in big bags, cloth bags. I'd carry them on the bus, and I'm sure he would bring. They use these, they'd take these apart during the war effort, and they'd use them in life preservers.
Military use
them. Outside, they use them. So that's, if you had a big bag of milkweed, you were a hero for the day, because you were helping with the war effort. Because
the gasoline was rationed, you had coupons, your meat was rationed, sugar.
Yeah. My mother and father, they were smokers, and they couldn't buy only one brand of cigarettes. It's called Wing cigarettes. It's the only kind of cigarette that was sold to the public. All the cigarettes, all the candy, everything that went to the war effort, to the soldiers and stuff. Milky Ways, you couldn't buy a Milky Way. I mean, all during the war, I wanted a Milky Way, but you couldn't get it because Milky Ways were made by Mars or whoever made them, and they were sent overseas.
And I vividly remember my father giving me, I want to say a quarter, maybe it was a dime, to take to school and buy the stamps for my savings bond book. Because we each had a book, and every week we would purchase the stamps to put in the book.
Bring in 10 cents a week, and then you'd get a thing to put in your book, and eventually you'd get enough in the book you'd be able to buy a war bond, and everybody would clap, and it was quite a thing. You didn't suffer because of it. It was what needed to be done.
People were a lot different. You didn't lock things. We used to walk the railroad tracks. There were still trains. Trains still came through in a regular schedule. But we used to see how far you could walk on the track without falling off, which meant going all the way to Hamptons sometimes and back. And we used to play on the train cars that were parked. Nobody cared. If you got hurt, oh well.
Well, growing up, there were not too many children in the neighborhood. Then later on, as I got a little older, my uncle purchased bicycles for the whole family, and we were on cloud nine. We were able to go around the whole town, visiting people and doing like fishing, rafting. My favorite fishing place in Hampton Falls was the brook down below my house on Route 84, which is part of the Hampton Falls River. I spent many, many days down there catching shiners. Once in a while, maybe a trout, but rarely.
Anyway, we had an outhouse, which was about a good 100 to 150 feet from the house. It was in a little building. And I can remember in the middle of winter, when you had to go to the bathroom, many a times I'd be in my pajamas, barefooted, and run through the snow, and didn't think a thing of it. Go down and go to the bathroom in this little outhouse. And Mother and Father never worried about the kids because they always knew where they were. They were the neighbors. We didn't have to worry about somebody bothering us. It's a different world, obviously, today than it was back then.
When I first started working at New England Telephone in Exeter, there were, I think, 16 positions. And so everybody that came into work, you had the cords. And when somebody would, at their house, would dial O, it would come into us, a light would come on, we'd have cords, and you'd have to plug into the cord and pick up the call. And then wherever you wanted to call to, we had circuits going out. So we'd have to take the other connecting cord to yours and connect it to wherever you wanted to go, and we'd have to dial the number. And it was a dial, and we'd have pencils with little balls on the end of it so we could dial.
And I just remember the food back then was so different. I remember getting butter in a bag, but it wasn't really butter. It was white lard, I guess, and they had a little tablet in the bag inside, and you had to break the tablet, and then you squished the bag until it was all nice and yellow. I remember Ann and I did it many times together, because it was something that you had fun doing back then. And back then, you did everything yourself. You made all your own food. You didn't. You went to the store and you bought sugar, flour, maybe shortening, eggs, and milk. And a lot of those things you didn't buy at the store. They were brought to your house by different vendors. I remember, Cushman's truck would always come. And there was a man that sold vegetables. I don't remember his name, but he was a local person that would drive around the neighborhoods and sell vegetables out of his truck and fruits. And there was a meat man, but I don't remember who it was.
There was the ice truck that came around.
Yeah, the ice truck. And I remember my dad going over to Bachelor's over in Hampton to get ice. And we would go to the barn, and it'd be all these huge chunks of ice with sawdust, separating them and keeping them cold. But they would, wipe off the sawdust and get your chunk of ice, and you take it home and put it in your refrigerator, whatever you had, needed ice for. But
my mother was a great cook and baker, and our father worked very hard on the farm, and we always had big meals with dessert at noon, right?
I can remember my dad bringing me up to get milk. So we came up to the farm and got milk from the cows. And Dad always had to take me in the barn and hold me up so I could pet the noses of the 3 workhorses.
When we used to get the mail, the rural delivery of the mail, everyone would say you could set your watch by the mailman. He would buy. You knew exactly what time he was going to go by every day, which is so interesting compared to today. And everybody, of course, used the mails. And some people still didn't have telephones. There was always a public telephone at the store, or wherever the stores were. The whole thing was a different world. And people seemed to have more time for each other.